So I welcome you all. This is the second session of Intermediate JavaScript. In the last session, we discussed about how JavaScript is a synchronous programming language. It runs on a single thread. But then we also discussed that the asynchronous nature that we see in JavaScript, like set timeout, like when we use an AJAX call or fetch request, right? Then what really is happening underneath? Like we saw the entire flow that is not being done by the JavaScript. JavaScript delegates that task to web APIs. So JavaScript is synchronous. We hence justified that. And then we discussed about the difference between JavaScript and Node.js. Like many times people get confused what really Node.js is. Is it a framework, or is it a library, or is it a new language? So we discussed about that Node.js is nothing but a runtime environment that allows us to write JavaScript, or allows us to build a server with JavaScript. So it comes with the V8 JavaScript engine. We also talked about the different JavaScript engines present in the most popular browsers, Chrome, then Firefox, and then uh, Safari, Edge. And so these are the things we discussed in the last class. And also we talked about how JavaScript is platform independent. Now, in today's session, we'll talk about things like what is the difference between var and let and const, like what are the functionalities or what are the changes when we declare something using var, or when we declare something using let or const. We'll talk about this string concatenation, the new ES6 feature, which have been already been adopted by a lot of developers, and how awesome it is. Like what are the things that it can do, how clean it can make our code. uh, and then we'll also talk about ternary operators, how we can use it as an alternative to if else in a lot of cases. Like like if we use ternary operator, the thing that you could do with if else using 5 lines of code, you can do that in just a single line of code with ternary operator. So that makes look like your JavaScript code cleaner, but then that's subjective, honestly. But also it makes it look like professional, because you're achieving the same functionality but with less lines of code. But then it depends on the team. We'll talk about that. And then we'll convert a if else code with ternary and see how clean it gets. We'll also talk about the alternative to using if. Like many times, instead of using if, we can make use of the and operator and make it look more professional, more clean. So we'll talk about that. So these are the things that we will discuss in today's class. So let's get started, people. So let's talk about var and let and const. So previously there was only one way to declare any variable, either be it you're declaring a function, or you're declaring a string or number or boolean or anything. You can only use var keyword to declare a variable. But then with the new ES6 feature, it came, we got let, we got const, and we'll talk about how it is different than using var, like what difference it makes in our code. The first difference among these three is var is function scoped. The scope of a variable declared with var is function scope. Like if I am declaring a variable inside of a function using var keyword, that variable will be accessible only inside of that function, like anywhere inside of this function. Again, with let keyword, it is a block scoped. Const, on the other hand, is also block scope. So let and const are block scope. Now, what are block? It's these blocks are nothing but those curly braces, right? So like inside a for loop, like when we run something in a for loop and we declare that variable using let, that variable will only be accessible inside of that for loop, not outside of it. But then if we declare it with var, that variable will be accessible inside of the entire function that the for loop is in. So we'll see that in a code, and we'll see how much of difference it makes and how amazing it is when you use let, because then it makes your code look more clean, intuitive, and also it makes sense. And then we'll talk about how let allows us to change the memory address, but then const doesn't allow us to do that. Like const means like something you are declaring which is constant, like which should not be changed, right? Which if someone tries to change that value, it should throw an error, and it does, but in some cases it doesn't. We'll talk about those cases as well. But then let allows us to reassign a variable. So we'll talk about all these things. Let's get started with the first code today, and which is this scope. This is the for loop, and this for loop is the old school for loop. The reason I'm saying it is an old school for loop is because the variable that we are using inside of this loop has been declared using var keyword, and var keyword has been there since JavaScript came out. So what we discussed is var keyword variables declared using var are function scoped, not block scoped, which means technically this variable should be accessible in my entire program, because my entire program is nothing but one single function, which is the global function. Like that's how JavaScript treats, like this is your global function. Inside of that you can declare functions again. It can be anything. So that is functions inside of that global function. This var keyword is declared in the global function, so it should be available in your entire code. Let's verify that once. Let me try to console log if I can get access to var I outside of the for loop. So I'll run this function. I'll run this file using Node again. We talked about the differences between Node and JavaScript in the last session. So it is scope.js, and look, I have access to var I outside of the for loop. But then again, we should remember, we should not forget that the entire purpose of this keyword, of this variable, was to run the for loop, right? So it should not, like technically, it should not be accessible outside of it. So then what do we do? For that case, for cases like this, where we only want the access of any variable inside of a scope, inside of a block, for instance, for loop, we can make use of let or const. But if it is a loop you are iterating, it should be let, because const will not allow you to change the value. So the moment I change it into let, and let me just rename these variables to let underscore I. The moment I change this variable declaration using let, again, as I discussed, let is block scope, so which means that the access to this variable should only be inside of this block. It should not be accessible outside of this for loop. So let me check. So I will run this file again and we'll verify it. And look, I got a nasty error saying that let I is not defined in line number 5, because this variable is only accessible inside of this block. So that makes a lot of sense. Let and const really is a superb addition to JavaScript, because this is exactly what we needed in cases like this, right? The whole purpose of this variable is to iterate the loop, is to run the loop for certain times, and that's it. We should not get access to this variable outside of it, and we are not getting it now. So that is one difference between let and var and const, which is let is block scoped, whereas var is function scoped. All right. So the next difference,
Shubham, here you didn't mention any function. You rightly write the for loop, right?
yes.
Then for function, how we access that?
Okay. So
Like
you are, so you are asking that if I would have written this for loop inside of a function, would I
Yes,
have been
yes,
able to access the variable? Is this what you are asking?
yes, yes, actually.
Okay, super. So let's do that, right? Now this for
Yes.
loop is inside of this function add.
Okay.
So if I try to access it outside this function add, will I get it? I want your answer. Like a guess.
No, no, no,
We will not get it, right? Obviously.
no.
But if I move this code inside here, now this code is inside of add function. Now you tell me, will I get let I now?
Yes, yes, actually. Now we will access.
Okay, let me check.
Okay.
So I'll clear out the console. I'll run the function, I'll run the file again, and okay, I'm sorry, I have to run this function, obviously.
Yes, yes. We have to return that.
No, I don't have to return anything, like, because this function will run and then it will try to print the
Yeah, yeah.
value of let I, and we'll see if we can access it. So again, I got the same error as I got the last time, that let I is not defined, reference error. It is not able to find let I. Why is that? The reason being, variables declared using let are block scoped, which means that they will be available inside of this block, inside of this for loop, this block. It will
Yes.
not be accessible outside of it. Got it?
Yes.
But
Yes, yes.
then if I declare it with var keyword, it will be accessible, because variables declared with var keyword are accessible inside of a function. They are function scope. So this variable will be available inside of this entire function. I can access it anywhere inside of it. You got the difference?
Yes, yes. Okay.
Super. So can we proceed, or you want to see one more
Yeah, yeah.
example of it?
Proceed. You can proceed. Just I
Super.
want to ask. Just
Okay, you can ask any more doubts if
thank you
you
for the
have.
clarification.
It's all
No,
right.
no, no. Yeah, it's all right. I get it. Thank you.
So this was one difference between var and let and const. The another difference is variables declared using var can be reinitialized and also reassigned, whereas variable declared using let and const can never ever be reinitialized. Like, let me give you an example. Let me show you what I really mean by that. If I declare a variable, let's say name, I have declared this variable using var. So what do I mean by reinitialize? Reinitialize means I can again, somewhere in my code, let's say after 1,000 lines, I can again do something like var name equals to something else, like, I don't know, Rohit maybe, and no error will be thrown here. But then, is it right? Like, from the coding perspective, is it right? No, right? Because you never know who else declared this variable where in the code. So JavaScript should throw some error or something, but will it throw an error here? Let's run this function and see. Node scope.js, it doesn't throw any error. So imagine you have a big program where there are so many modules. I hope like you're clear with what these modules, and you have like 5 or 6 or maybe 15 different pieces of files, JavaScript files. And in one of the files, you are adding some variable, and you did something like var name equals to this, which was already been declared somewhere in some other file. JavaScript will not throw any error. You will not know what went wrong. And in the entire code, you will see a bug, which will be so hard to debug. If I do the same thing with let, see what happens. I'll run the file again, and look, I get an error. It says that identifier name has already been declared. This is something we really needed. So now we are at least somewhat safe. Like if I'm trying to add a variable using let keyword, and if it throws an error, then I will know that, oh no, this variable has already been declared somewhere else. So that means that the use of this variable would be something different than what I was trying to use it for. So I would know that I cannot use this variable. I will try something new, something different. Or maybe I will ask my teammate, hey, you know what, you already have added this variable, so what is the purpose? Can I use it or something? So at least we saved ourselves from this bug. So this is what I mean by reinitialize. Variables declared with var can be reinitialized. It is allowed, no error whatsoever. Whereas variables declared with const or lat, you cannot reinitialize them. This is one difference.
Okay.
Second difference, variables declared with let and const. Like what is the difference between let and const? Like both you cannot reinitialize, but then what is the difference between them then? Well, if I do this is completely allowed. No error will be thrown here, right? Like because I declared it using let. So let reinitialize is not allowed, but reassign is allowed. Like I can change the value of the variable anytime in my code. That is what let allows us to do. Reinitialize is not allowed, means I cannot do something like this, but I can do something like this. I can change the value anytime. Whereas with const, if I do something like this once, I can never change the value of it. But there is a condition. We'll talk about this condition in a bit. But if I declare this variable using const, and if I try to do something like this, I will get an error. Let's see what the error is. I'll clear out my console. I'll run this file again, and look, the error says that assignment to constant variable. So this is a const, so there should not be any change to the value of this variable. If someone is trying to change it, throw an error. So this is the difference between let and const. With let, you cannot reinitialize, but you can reassign. With const, neither you can reinitialize nor you can reassign. There is a condition though. Let's talk about that sweet condition, because a lot of times, people skip through it and they doesn't know what really happens. So the condition is, it's true with primitives. Primitives such as string. If I'm storing string, then yes, it will throw an error. Primitives such as number. If I'm storing number, yes, it will throw an error. Primitives such as boolean, it will throw an error. But with objects, I'm allowed to make changes to this object, even with const. So this is something that a lot of times, developers ignore it. They think that, oh no, I have declared this name and as an object with const. That means that no one will be able to change it. Change in the sense, no one would be able to add any new properties to it or change any properties from it. Like they do something like a, which is a value of, I don't know, something like idj. That's my initials of username in the dev journey. You see how I did that sweet advertisement? So let's say I have a property of username inside of this object. They think that no one will be able to add a field or add a property inside of this object because I declared it with const. But hey, that's not right. I can actually make changes to it, because for JavaScript, it's an object. It is not saying what is inside of this object. You got it? It doesn't matter. It doesn't care what is inside of this object. What are the properties inside of this object? It doesn't care. It just says that, oh, it's an object. That's it. Now, I'll not allow anyone to change this object to an array or to a string or to a number. But if anyone is trying to add or remove something inside of this object, it's completely allowed. So that's the difference. This is something, one must know. So let's try to add, or in fact, let's do something. Let's try to change the username to idj or something. Let's see if we get an error here. And look, I didn't get any error. I was easily able to change the value of the username property of this name object, which was declared with const. So this is something really important to do. And this is the same with the array. Let's say it was an array, and let me change it to names. And let's say at first it just had my name in it. So if I try to add something to this array, will it throw an error? Like if I do names.push and add a new value into it, let's say Satish is there with me in this class. So will it throw an error now? Because I am actually making changes to the array value, right? I'm actually adding something in. Well, it will not throw any error. So this is something we should keep in mind. Since it's not a primitive, it's not actually immutable. We can actually change it. We can actually change the values inside of the array or inside of the object, but we cannot change the object or the array. Like I cannot do something like, hey, names equals to an object. Like if I do this, I will get an error. Or hey, names equals to another different array. No, I can't even do that. Like if I do this, I'll get an error again. So I hope this is clear. If anyone has a doubt in it, like we have Ravi, Satish, Janil in the class. I'm not sure if Janil is still in the session, but a lot of times I've seen people ignore this part. They think that, okay, I've declared an array with the value inside of it using const, which means that no one will be able to make changes to it. But then because of this thought, a lot of times we see so many bugs inside of the code.
Okay, Shubh.
Yep. So can I proceed?
Yeah, I have no doubts. You can ask.
Okay, so that's all right. I'll proceed with the next slide. So in this slide, we saw the differences between var and let and const. We saw how var is function scope, whereas let and const are block scope. We saw how let allows reassignment but doesn't allow reinitialize, and const allows neither of that too. Whereas with var, you can reinitialize a variable anytime. It will not throw any errors. That's like really risky if you think about it. So yeah, so this is the thing that we already saw. Like let allows you to change memory address. Like you can actually change the value of a variable declared with the let, but with const you cannot do that. But you can add something to an object or to an array, or remove some property of an object or of an array. So I'm moving on to the next slide, which is string concatenation. Two ways to do string concatenation in JavaScript: the plus operator and the new template string that we have seen, that we have access to from ES6. So obviously we all know what the plus operator is. It's like super simple. But I'm going to talk about the new template string. What it allows us to do, it allows us to add multiple.
Can you change the screen?
Yeah, are you able to see the screen?
No, I'm seeing only code.
Oh, thanks for mentioning. I don't know how I forget every time to change the screen. Superb. So are you able to see the slides now?
Yes.
Awesome. I'm sorry, I always forget to switch the screens. I should remember the next time. So string concatenation, there are two ways to do string concatenation, and that is with the plus operator and the template string. The template string is introduced in the new ES6 version, which is really super, really awesome. It makes your code looks really clean. I love it. So I'm going to talk about what are the things you can do with this template string. Number one, you can add multi-line string without any without too much of work. previously, if you were to add multi-line string, you have to add this backslash n every time. But with template string, it's super simple. Also, you can add JavaScript expression or variable inside of string. And that is, I guess, the most used feature of template string. So let's look at the code and see what are the things a template string can do. So this is an old school way of writing a multi-line statement, which is I want to add a new line after easily write. So what I have to do is I have to add backslash n, right? So it becomes really nasty when there are like a lot of multi-line things in the code in the string. But with template string, if I convert it to template string, the way to convert string to template string is you add this tick and it becomes a template string now. But with this, I can easily do things like this. So it is a new line, right? I can do things like this. So it's that awesome. So this is one thing with template string.
It is single code, right?
It is not a single code. It is, I'm not really sure the name of it. I guess it's called backtick. Yes, exactly. It's called backtick. You can find it in the first key of the number section. Like we have the num section right on top of those alphabets. Like you can see it on the first key. So this is backtick. Using backtick, you can convert your string to a template string. So with template string, we can do multi-line string, and also we can add JavaScript expression or variables inside of our string. Like previously, let's say I have a variable name, let's say. So if I were to add it in a string, I have to do what? I have to say my name is, and then do a plus thing, and then this variable name, right? This is what I have to do. But with template string, we don't have to do this nasty thing. Like imagine if we have to add so many variables, you have to close your string again put a plus, again add a variable, again close your this thing, again start a string. So this becomes really nasty real quick. But with template string, it becomes really simple. I can simply say my name is and add this dollar symbol with the curly braces and add my variable here. That's it. So this is my name is Shubham. So it evaluates to my name is Shubham. It is really clean and it looks really professional. Also, it not just I can add variables, I can add JavaScript expression. Like I can say I am, let's just do a JavaScript expression. I can say like 20 plus 3. I'm 23 years old. That's it. So this is a JavaScript expression. I can even call a function inside of it here. So this many things one can do using template string. But if I were to do with plus operator, you can imagine how nasty it would have gotten.
Yes, actually.
So these are the features of template string, which we can use as an alternative to plus operator. Let me. Did I change my screen?
Yes, Shubham.
Okay, did you see this code that I just?
Yes, I got it.
Okay, I'm really sorry. Again, I forgot to switch my screen. Oh God.
Yes, I seen it. I seen both screens. Now only you can change it.
Oh, super. Thank God. All right, so let's go to desktop. Okay, now you're able to see the entire screen, right? Like you are able to see its code as well as
both screens I seen. Yeah, as well as both screens.
Awesome. So let's go back to the next slide. So we have completed two things. Just in case the session gets over, I just want to repeat it. We talked about the differences between var and init and const. And then we talked about string concatenation using template string. The next thing that we are to discuss is ternary operator, which I guess very few times people use. And a lot of developers, they don't even remember the syntax because they don't use it very often. we can use it as an alternative to if else and make our code look more professional and more clean. So with an if else, how will we do it? Like, we have an if condition. If it is true, it will run the first block. If it is not, it will run the else block, right? If I were to do the same thing in just one line, the only way I can do it is using ternary operator. So I can do something like, I can give the condition. If the condition is true, then the first expression will run. If it is not, the second expression will run. Like, how simple it is. Can you imagine that? So let's convert a code with ternary operator and see how clean it becomes, how professional it looks. But then again, a lot of times people debate that readability comes into the picture and all that. So it depends on the team you are with. If the people in your team are uh, accustomed to using ternary operators, then that shouldn't be a problem. If they are not so well versed with ternary operators, then maybe you should stick with if else, because then it wouldn't be easy for them to always try to understand what's really happening. But it's good to know for you. So let's check ternary.js file. I have a variable age, and I have a function isAvop 18. This function does nothing but it takes an age as a parameter, it takes a number as a parameter, it checks if the age is above 18, it returns true. If it is not, it returns false. Now, what I want to do is, the use case is something like this. I want to add an appropriate message to this message variable, depending on if the age that is passed is above 18 or not. So if I were to use if else, old school, then I can do something like this. If, let me call this function is above 18 and pass the variable age, which is 23. So if this function returns true, then this block will run. If not, then this block will run, right? So I can do something like message equals to, hey, you are allowed, you know. And if not, then I can add a message that you are not allowed. And then I can just print out the message. So this is one use case, right? Like, I can do something like this. I can call this function. I can check if the age is actually above 18. If this function returns true, then this block will run. If not, this block will run, and that's it. So let's run this file, and we see that we get you are allowed because age is 23 and it is above 18. So this block is running. Now look how many lines we used just to do this simple thing. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of code to just add a message to this variable. How about we convert it to ternary operator? The same thing. Now with ternary operator, what I'll do is, first the condition, which is above 18, I'll call this function and pass age into it. So this is the condition. If this returns true, then this block will run. If not, then this block will run. It's that simple. So if this is true, then what I want is this piece of code. Boom. If not, then I want this piece of code to execute. I can get rid of the if else, and look. So this is the ternary operator. Now, since age is above 18, obviously it will return true. So this is the piece of code that will run. This is the expression that will get evaluated. This is the expression that will run. And the message value should be you are allowed. Let me run this function again. Okay, I've saved it though. And what we see is you are allowed. Let me change the variable to 17 maybe, when I was a teenager. And I'm not allowed because this block ran since is above 18 returned false. The condition returned false. So you saw how 5 lines of code converted to a single line does the same thing, but it looks so much clean and professional now. So this is the power of, well, I would rather say a clean way of writing ternary operator. There is no change in the code though. Like, it's not like one is better than the other. It's just your personal preference. It's good to know though. So we can use ternary operator as an alternative to if else, and we can make our code less clunky, more beautiful. Like if less lines of code is beautiful to you. So any doubt in it?
Yeah, it is clear, Shubham.
Okay, superb. So
Yeah, one thing is
yes,
it's the syntax is we cannot change it, right? That means in first block we have to write the true whatever it is.
yes. So this is the
Second,
condition. Let me put on the syntax here. At first comes the condition. Okay, whatever condition it is, like something that you want to evaluate as, like in if case we have a condition, right?
yes,
Just like that, the same condition is here in ternary operator. First we have this condition, and then we have this question mark, and we can add an expression here. You can do anything, like you can do console log, you can run a function here, maybe you can do anything in this expression,
yes.
which will run if the condition is true. And then there is this colon, and you can add one more expression which will run when the condition is false. So this is
Okay.
the syntax of ternary operator.
Yeah, actually, in if else condition we can write. I mean, if the statement is wrong, then first block we can add, we can show. That means we can um, write the code in opposite direction also, right? In if else condition.
Yes, so here also you can do that. Like you can just add, a not operator. Like if I add a not operator, then
Okay,
it
okay.
will just be the opposite.
Yes, yes. Okay, okay. That's what I'm asking. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so this was ternary operator, which we can use as an alternative to if else. Impress your boss maybe. Then the next thing we will see today, and this is the last slide of today's session, is another, you can say hack, or you can say a clean way of doing something, which is, how about we don't even want to use if in some cases. Like, like I want to check a condition and then I want to do something. How about I don't want to use if at all? We can make use of the and operator in that case. So let's check this out in the code. I'm going to switch to a new file, and versus if. So here I have a variable called is allowed, which is true, and I have a function login. Like the reason I put it as login is because you can really relate it to a real application or real world application. Imagine like we have a function login, which should only log in if uh, the user is allowed to log in. Like you can do so many checks before logging in some user, maybe checking the password, or maybe checking the email, or maybe checking the age, or a lot of things. So this is that check, and this is the function to run if the check is true. Like if the check passes. If the check fails, this function should not run. So an ideal way to write that code would be, if the check is true, if the user is allowed to log in, then I will call the login with the username. What would be another way to do the same thing, like without even using if condition? There is a way. So let me run this file once. And we see that you are logged in as Indian Dev Journey because is allowed is true. So the code goes inside of the if block. What if I do something like, what if I want to do something like login, but then on a condition? So I can do is is allowed and call my login function. So what's happening here? You know how the AND operator works, right? The first thing it checks is the condition that is on the left of it, on the left side of it. If this condition evaluates to true, then only it will go and evaluate the right side of it. So if someone is allowed to log in, then only I should call the login function. So you can use this hack to replace the if else, to replace the if check. So I'll run this function, I'll run this file again, and I get the same result, but then in just one line of code again. Previously we had 3 lines of code with an if check and so many things. So we can use this AND operator as an alternative to if in some cases, not in all cases, because what one thing you can't do is with if as a condition, you can do so many things here, right? Like you can have 100 lines of code inside of if, but you cannot have that same thing here. So yeah, it depends on the use case, but if your use case is something similar to this, where you are just calling a function after a check, then this would be ideal. So that's the end of today's session. I'm gonna wait for some time for for doubts or anything. So these are the things that we went through today. We saw the differences between var and let and const in terms of scope, in terms of reassignment, reinitialization, errors, and all that sort of stuff. We saw how good this is, like why we should always go with let and not with var, because you will get an error which would be really helpful to debug your code. We saw a clean way to concatenate strings using template string. We saw a clean way to write an if else condition, like without writing if else, but have the same functionality just like if else, and that is ternary operator. We saw a clean way to not even write if condition and make use of the end operator and get our code run. So yes, if there are any doubts or if there are any sort of clarifications needed, or if anyone wants to add anything, let's do it now.
I have no doubts, Shubham. It's a good session.
Super. The reason I'm keeping this session small is because it's easy to remember things. Like if we have,
Yes, yes.
right?
Actually, the main thing is that we
Yeah,
can, yes, we can get it clearly.
yeah. Even I have realized it. Like when I used to look into YouTube videos, and if the video is too long, I kind of forget it. And again, I have to go back and watch all the things that I
Mm,
saw. So that's like, so that's the
yes,
reason I kept the session small. And also the topics are really simple. Like they are not huge,
yes.
big topics. So they are small, small hacks that I added that can be easily remembered in just one go. Also, as an end note, I would again like to mention, if you guys want to contact me, this is the email. If you are not following me in Instagram, I regularly post a lot of helpful stuff in Instagram. The ID is Indian Dev Journey. Go please check it out. Also, I have a channel, a developers channel, where we kind of do some, like, people ask questions and people help each other out. If you want to join that, you can ping me in this number. Thank you so much.